Welcome to Real Estate Coaching Radio, starring award-winning real estate coaches and #1 international best-selling authors, Tim and Julie Harris. This is the #1 daily radio show for realtors looking for a no BS, authentic, real-time coaching experience. What's really working in today's market, how to generate more leads, make more money, and have more time for what you love in your life. And now your hosts, Tim and Julie Harris.
Welcome back. So good news, bad news. The good news is the election is over in 2 weeks.
Yay.
The bad news is that the sellers and buyers are using the election as their excuse not to transact. They're looking for great excuses to procrastinate, and that has been the #1 that we're hearing from coaching clients. We're hearing a lot of you asking us about how to overcome that objection. We're going to answer that question on today's podcast, but really what we're going to be focusing on are the winning conversations that you guys need to be prepared to have this weekend. Now, what we're doing, we do these every Friday, is we're preparing you, we're scripting you basically to have meaningful conversations with potential buyers and sellers about, obviously, transacting with you. So get ready. We're going to give you a lot of good notes today. And as always, remember, the notes from today's podcast and every podcast are available only at harrisrealestatedaily.com. So you have to subscribe to harrisrealestatedaily.com. It is free. It takes 2 seconds. All you have to do is drop your email address in to a little, bar there on the main website. And then you will get an email confirming you want the subscription. If you don't click the email to confirm you want the subscription, you won't get the newsletter. So the notes from today's show, you can use for yourself, obviously. Use them for coaching and training, maybe your own staff or your own brokerage, whatever you want to. It is there, but you have to subscribe to harrisrealestatedaily.com.
All right, so don't be a secret agent this weekend. The more you speak fluently about the market, the more business you'll do. So use the facts from today's podcast and the stats to start conversations, articulate your value. I try to sneak that in whenever I can, since that's the hot topic. Articulate your value and secure more buyer and seller business. Whether you're at an open house, following up on your existing leads, or out having fun with friends, learn how to have natural conversations where you can end up lead to this question: whom do they know who could use your help buying or selling real estate?
I love to make fun of the articulate your value, because everyone and their brother and their dog say it, but nobody actually knows how to articulate their value.
How do you do that? Yes.
Well, this is an aside from your notes, but it is fascinating that most agents, because they don't know how to really differentiate themselves in the marketplace, aka articulate your value. Mm-hmm. They don't actually know how to, do it in such a way that would be convincing for a stranger to want to do business with them.
Right.
That's the reason most agents are relegated to only doing business with their centers of influence and their past clients. And that's not such a bad thing. But I'm saying the biggest brokerages and the biggest real estate teams and the biggest individual practitioners, they know to get their business from multiple sources of, buckets, not just centers of influence and past clients. And ultimately, you have to learn how to compete. And ultimately, you have to learn how to show how you're different. And you have to do it in such a way that's not just a big word salad. It's actually a conversation. Frankly, it's a presentation. It's going to show them exactly how you're different. And that's what we've created for you with Ethical Real Estate Professional. Now, in case you have not heard, in case you've been sleeping under a rock, Julie and I are about to release a new real estate designation, which we really truly believe is going to revolutionize real estate agents in such a way that you're going to be part of a very prestigious club, a prestigious organization called Ethical Real Estate Professional. And do check out the website, ethicalrealestateprofessional.com. And as such, you're going to be part of a group of only 2,500 agents, because we decided to limit each designation to only 2,500 agents. And that's, we know that's a small group of agents, but we want this to be truly exclusive. We want this to be something that's aspirational. But what we really wanted to make this is so that when you're talking with potential buyers and sellers, you can tell them that you're an ethical real estate professional agent. You can show them the benefits and what you bring to the table. And that leads me to the first designation, which is going to be Ethical Real Estate Professional Exclusive Buyer's Agent. I've been working on it nonstop, and my brain is starting to turn to mush. But the Exclusive Buyer Agent presentation is really the heart of that product. And what it's going to do, it's going to pre-sell you to that prospective buyer and why they should be working with you exclusively as their exclusive buyer's agent. It's going to answer the question about commissions. It's going to explain to the buyer why they should be committing just to you, because we know even your close closest friends and family and loved ones and centers of influence, past clients, they are still going to be very sheepish about signing an agreement where they're going to obligate themselves to pay you a commission. And said agreements have to be in place. You know they have to be in place if you've been listening to this podcast. But here we go again. How are you going to explain to a prospective buyer, even if it's somebody you know, love, and trust, and they know, love, and trust you, how are you going to explain to them what your true value is? Well, we're doing it for you. And here's how you're going to participate. The launch event is coming up. We're actually about to land the plane. The landing gear is out. We're looking for the right runway. And that's going to be on a webinar. To be invited to the webinar, there's only one way. Text the word buyer, B-U-Y-E-R, to 47372. Text the word buyer, B-U-Y-E-R, to 47372. And then we're going to send you an invite that you're going to attend. And then for the launch event, which we're going to be doing hopefully in short order of time here, there's only going to be 100 agents that are going to be able to join, and those are going to be our founding members. More on that soon. But your homework from today's podcast is definitely to text the word buyer to 47372, and then you will be invited to the launch event. All right, Julie, so here are the talking notes that these guys are going to be using for this weekend so that they can have meaningful conversations that hopefully develop in real estate transactions.
Thank you for the intro to that. All right, point number 1, we're going to tell you the fact or the stat that gives you something to talk about, and then a little bit about how to talk about that. So first, existing home sales dropped by 2% from August to September, bringing the annual rate to 3.96 million homes. That's for the country. That's the slowest pace of sales since October 2010. Well, what does this mean to you? What does this mean to people you're talking to? This means that a lot of sellers are more motivated to sell their homes, thus making them potentially more negotiable. That's good news for buyers. Anybody who has their house on the market right now, and you talked about at the top of the podcast, waiting for the election to end and all that kind of stuff, fourth quarter, holidays, anybody who has their home for sale right now is quite serious.
Well, here, I'll combine. So I'm having a coaching call this morning with Dan Lesniak, and he's got some really great listings. 3.2 or 3 million and some others in that similar price range. And they're getting no showings.
Right.
And they're getting no showings because guess where he sells real estate?
And he's in Virginia, right?
Yeah, Northern Virginia,
well, that makes
DC.
Sense, right?
Yeah. So that whole market's basically frozen up because a lot of people are trying to figure out if they're going to have jobs after the election or not. And so what he's doing is he's really smart, is he's going to start hunting expireds because there's a whole bunch of other agents that are in that marketplace that have never had to do price reductions because the market's been so hot for so long. So now, because he's learned how to basically hunt expireds, he's going to start calling them and start picking up more multi-million-dollar listings. So the fact is that, yeah, there's a lot of sellers that are, getting frustrated despite the election because guess what? The election their time frame as to why they had to sell the house has nothing to do with the election. So if the agent's not able to essentially explain to the seller why the house, maybe we need to do a price adjustment, maybe we need to basically just frankly wait for the election to be over, So what I told Dan on the call today was in this particular market where it has these two listings, in that particular market, they're starting to experience crime from DC is pouring over into this market. And so up the way, 15 minutes are similarly sized homes of, essentially it's competing inventory, but it's in a different community. So I suggested to him that he goes and looks in showing time and to compare the amount of showings that are happening in that competing community, even though historically it hasn't been a competing community because it's further away from the Beltway in DC and it's 15 minutes away from this area where he's got these listings that have traditionally been more desirable because of the location. Well, now not so much because maybe the crime that's spilling over again from DC is adversely affecting the sellability of these houses. So what his homework is to go take a peek in showing time to see what's happening in the homes that are, further away and similar square footage, not similar price because the ones that are further away aren't going to cost as much, at least until the market figures this out, and then show that information to the seller and show the seller that homes are selling, but the buyers are passing on that particular community. And, maybe it's $3 million. That's his listing. And then one up the way is maybe $2.7 million. But also the crime rate in that area 15 minutes away is a lot less. Then you're going to have a lot of buyers that are going to choose one over the other. It's obvious. That's how he's going to learn how to use the market statistic that Julie just gave you for his advantage to get the home repositioned, aka lower the price.
Well, and good for him for being frosty about that and taking action and not just sitting on it and waiting for it to become an expired for him.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so point number 2, year over year, home sales fell 15.4%, down from 4.68 million in September last year. Fewer sales means you need more leads than you think you do to do the same business you've done in the past. For example, if you normally sell 2 homes per month when you're working with 5 buyers or sellers at the same time, You might need 10 active leads to sell the same 2 deals per month. People lose their will to sell. They might not be qualified anymore. They might not decide to move. But when sales are down, fewer people, there's less, what you would say, frothiness in the, it's not pandemic years anymore.
Well, recreational sellers take themselves out of the market
That's
in times
right.
like this. Like if you have somebody that just, I'm going to take my house off the market until the spring. Well, chances are if that is what they're going to do, they didn't really have any reason to sell in the first place. They were a recreational seller. Boom markets, frankly, in a lot of the more expensive markets, you do have a lot of recreational sellers. They don't have to sell. They just want to cash out, move up to the next big house. They aren't financing. They could care what the rates are. You guys getting all this? So, keep all these things in mind when you're looking at these statistics.
Yes, I would say, and I'm interested if you would agree or disagree. I'm seeing that phenomenon that you just described more in the high-end luxury
For sure.
end of things because, if you've got like a $2 million house, it's probably a perfectly good house. If you don't have a relocation or a divorce or something like that fueling your motivation, you can sit on it until the spring.
Well, so the key word in what you just read to them, Julie, and again, she's reading from our notes that you can get when you become a Harris Real Estate Daily subscriber, is the word lead, right? So a lot of these guys don't know a lead from a lead. So our definition, what should be your definition of a lead, is somebody that's been fully pre-qualified. You know what their time frame is. If they're a buyer, they've been fully vetted as far as financing goes. They have realistic expectations. They're not having a champagne taste on a beer budget, all those things. And we teach you guys how to do that with our pre-qualification scripts. But if you don't have a buyer, and a buyer's going to be the easier lead to get, if you don't have a buyer that's willing to go through the gauntlet of pre-qualification, then that's not a lead. A lead is somebody who's actually on the other side of the process of proving they have the ability to buy financially and proving that they have the willingness to buy psychologically. Those are two different things. So if you have one over the other of those two things, they're not going to be a buyer. A lot of people want to buy a house, but they can't financially do it. A lot of people can financially do it, but they don't psychologically right now have the willpower to do it. You guys getting it?
Yeah, they have to have both.
They have to have both, which means you're going to have to really get good at pre-qualifying. Otherwise, you're just going to be stuck with a bunch of unmotivated people. You're going to roll into the new year. I've got 20 leads. Well, okay, if I were coaching you and Tim and Julie were to basically go through every one of your leads, and we were to ask, okay, what's their motivation? Okay, what's their time frame? Do they have anything else to sell? Have they been completely approved? Have you all the things? And you'll discover quickly that most of the folks that you think are leads in your CRM system are nothing other than a name and an email.
They're a contact.
That you're dripping on. They're a contact. There's a difference between a contact and a lead.
Okay, so point number 3. Today, the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate in the U.S. is around 6.88%. This rate is consistent with recent trends as mortgage rates have fluctuated around 7%, give or take one side of 7 throughout the month. The rising rates reflect broader economic conditions, making affordability a key challenge for some home buyers. Remember, if you're paying all cash, you don't care. But meanwhile, the ones that do care, learn the ways to defeat higher rates. We've done several podcasts about that, about adjustable rate mortgages, new construction mortgages subsidized by the builder for lower rates, assumables, and rate buy-downs. Those are 4 specific tools that you should be able to talk fluently about to get the rates down.
Right. So who cares if the rate is 6.88%? You have a whole war chest of ways to get the rate down even lower. And we did a long podcast on Friday talking about assumable mortgages. So you could actually help somebody walk in. 20% of all the mortgages out there are assumable, which means they can walk into that person's, like say they took the mortgage out in 2021 or whatever. The rate is 3%. And it's a 30-year fixed, and there's now, what would there be? 26 years left in the mortgage. So you can have a buyer cash the seller out of their equity, walk in there, and basically assume that mortgage at that rate. But you've got to know how to do all these things. That's what this new market demands. If all you're doing as an agent is looking in the MLS to seeing what's for sale, looking at the rate sheet to figure out what the interest rates are, you should not be surprised if you are not in the business in 12 months, let alone 6 months. The reality of it is this market demands agents with skills. So much of the emphasis in the last, really, I'd say 10 years has been put on marketing and branding and who knows you. And if they know you, then they're going to call you. They might call you, but if you can't service them, they're not going to do business with you.
And how many of you, remember today we're talking about conversations about real estate, right? Just keep on number 4. Okay. So how many of you have had conversations at open houses, lead follow-up, parties, centers of influence where they say, well, I would love to buy a house, but I'm waiting for rates to come down. And you say, yeah, me too. That's not an objection handler. The objection handler is, what is the rate that you're shooting for? And if there's a way that I can show you that you can still achieve that today, Does that change your plans?
And if that should work, frankly, and if it doesn't, then they're probably not really waiting for the rates to go down.
They were just throwing that out there.
Exactly. They're just read
Talking
they
point.
read it someplace and they thought that's what they're supposed to say. Point number 4, Julie.
As of October 2024, the median home price in the U.S. is approximately $394,300. Even with slower sales, prices are still rising. What's happening in your local market? Know your stats. Remember the story about what happened to Dan's listings. He's got to be very conscious of what's happening around him. Not all neighborhoods have the same level of appreciation, days on the market, and list to sell price ratio. Sometimes, you can take a neighborhood, maybe like what you were talking about with Dan, where it's had a certain profile for several years.
Well, this one in particular, Julie, you're talking about more like decades.
Yeah, and then something starts to happen. And then the numbers that you've been thinking about and you've had as a little marker in your brain for the past decade are all changing.
You know what's bizarre? And I remember when you and I figured this out, like when we were growing up, we grew up in Columbus, Ohio, Central Ohio. And there was this area that was near Dublin called Muirfield. And Muirfield, if you guys are golfers, you've heard of it. So Muirfield, for starting in the 70s, was a Jack Nicklaus golf course and community and everything. That was there was Arlington and arguably maybe Worthington, but really Arlington and Muirfield were the most desirable places in Columbus to live. Would you agree?
I would agree. In a beautiful neighborhood, too.
Both of them. Okay. But what happened is that the houses in Muirfield were built in the 70s. And they were looking like they were built in the 70s. And these were big houses. Some of them were big houses. Big houses require a lot of maintenance and upkeep, roofs and windows and all the rest of it, right? 5 furnaces. Well, guess what happened? Les Wexner, founder of the, Abercrombie & Fitch, Victoria's Secret, all of that, he built this stunningly gorgeous neighborhood, which was probably a half hour, 45 minutes away from Muirfield, called New Albany Country Club. And that's where Julie and I sold real estate. Truthfully, one of the most beautiful areas you could possibly imagine to ever sell real estate. Well, guess what New Albany Country Club area did? It sucked the life out of the buyers that were going to be buying in Muirfield, because the inventory was new, because the houses were newer, because the floor plans were better, because the country club was better, and so on and so on and so on. So what does that tell you? Even communities that are incredibly well established do have they're trendy. You could have, like the Muirfield houses, the design of them, the architecture of them, the elevations, the whole thing, it's trendy. You drive through for the most part, and it does look like a neighborhood that was built in the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like. That's what it feels like. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not criticizing. I mean, Julie.
But neighborhoods go through cycles.
Julie and I were built in the 70s and the 80s, for God's sake.
That's right.
Right?
Exactly.
Many of you were too. Yeah, but that's the point. Is neighborhood. So even if you are well established in a community, if all of a sudden the market starts to slow, it's because the next generation of buyers are not finding that particular community as appealing as usually a new construction community that's nearby. And then it's just not a trendy place to live anymore. More expensive homes. People are very sensitive to the brand of the community. That's the reason, like in some of these big high-rise areas, like in Miami, it's a Ritz-Carlton building or it's a Four Seasons building. People love the brand. And so Muirfield no longer was the brand New Albany Country Club was, and out went some of the best buyers and down went the prices.
Yes, that's right. And I remember for a while there were oceans of expireds, and the only way that anything would sell is to really, really get the right price.
Well, we picked off a lot of expireds in there, and it was, you're right.
And when people bought them, I remember, because we did a lot of both sides of that, because we would do the open houses and sell it ourselves.
Well, it's because other agents weren't selling in there.
That's right.
But
those were people who wanted to rehab.
But the cost per square foot in there was like nothing for the house. It was spectacular.
Yeah.
And what eventually happens is houses got cheap enough that people went in there and start rehabbing them, and the neighborhood then started to make its own comeback, and it's still doing that. That's the cycle of neighborhoods. That's the way communities work. So open your eyes to that, and don't just think because you happen to live in a particular area and it's where you know, it doesn't mean that it's going to be a real great place to sell real estate. Julie, point number
5.
All
right. The total housing inventory in the country is 1.13 million homes. That's down about 8%
You
year
mean
over year.
available homes for sale?
For sale, yes. Yes, thank you. For more inventory, look to new construction, expired listings for sale by owners, probate, and your own database. Again, we have done podcasts on this. Florida and Texas, however, so remember, inventory countrywide is down, but Florida and Texas have a lot more inventory and are largely becoming a buyer's market. So what's happening in your market? Watch your MLS hot sheet to see what's happening where you sell.
Now be careful. Buyer's market does not mean that the homes are going to have to be priced in alignment with actually what's happening. So I saw a statistic yesterday, Jules, you saw this too, on CNBC, that this has been I was about to use a bad word, but
potty mouth.
Yeah, this was the worst. Last month was the worst month for sales since 2010.
Yes.
And it was like the numbers were just yuck.
Yeah.
And yet, homes still appreciated by almost 3%.
That's exactly right. Yes, I have a point coming up about that. And, so that proves that's the antithesis of people saying, oh, I see all these price reductions, the market must be crashing, or the market crash is coming. No, home prices are still going up.
It's called inflation, folks.
Yes.
You could argue that there never has been real estate appreciation. It's always been inflation. But that's going to keep prices continuing to escalate. So why are there price reductions? How are these two things in conflict? It's because sellers just aspirationally price, aka overprice, and then those aspirational prices after a few weeks on the market, good listing agents are getting those prices down. So what you're seeing people pick up on are price reductions, not the actual devaluing of real estate. Do not conflate the two. They're not the same. Point number 6.
Yes, point number 6, unsold inventory represents a 3.4 month supply. Now, that's not quite a balanced market. It's not a buyer's market if we put it all into the country stats, but it is swaying a bit more towards buyers in many areas. What does that mean? Some of you came to expect, during especially the pandemic years, that it was normal to have a house on the market for 30 seconds with 20 offers. So when we talk about the 3.4 month supply swaying it a little bit towards buyers, that means they're probably not going to have to compete. They probably don't have to go 10% over the list price.
But be careful on that, because even if you're in a market that's dominantly a buyer's market, there are definitely always going to be holdouts. There are always going to be streets. There's always going to be types of homes. There's always going to be a little,
really good house.
Exactly. Yeah. So don't just automatically assume because some new listing comes for sale that, it's going to be just like all the last 10 closings. Nope. This could be a really great lot or something really exceptional. You've got to be a real expert. Remember I said at the top of today's show, it's a skills-based market now. So get real good at doing CMAs. And as we've, practically begged you guys to do every single day, the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning is look at that day's hot sheet and see what the trends are. And there's a lot of great MLS software apps out there that are going to be able to translate the data for you to tell you, this is what essentially the trajectory is, and houses in this particular community over or under this particular price with this many bedrooms, all those things. You got to look for those trends. That is what the buyers and the sellers expect you to know. Point number 7.
Point number 7, hot topic, buyer's agent commissions did drop slightly, averaging 2.55% to 2.58%, varying greatly by region. In markets like Anaheim, California, the rate is as low as 2.1.
From?
No, averaging. It depends on the market regionally.
I got it.
Okay,
Sorry.
So in Anaheim, it's 2.1. That's on the low end. In Austin, it's 2.99. Now, this is an ongoing thing that we're tracking as a result of the commission lawsuits and all that kind of stuff. I wonder, because the interesting thing about Texas is, of all of the places that are enforcing early some of those new rules, Texas is high on the list. I wonder whether that is causing agents to have their act together faster and defend some of the commission. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't think that. I think what you're saying is possibly true, but I think the reality of it is that most agents are still not having an exclusive sign that dictates the buyer pays the commission what the commission rate is. Mm-hmm. I'll suggest to you that that's still not happening, and I'll suggest to you that there's absolutely no policing of the files, and I'll suggest to you that the brokerages are acting as business as normal prior to the settlement agreements, and they're still paying out half the commission as they always have. There's nobody in the process. So like if you're a buyer's agent, and I'm not telling you this so that you can essentially be out of step with the guidelines. I'm not saying that at all.
No.
I'm just saying this is what I suspect is happening. Is that if you're a buyer's agent and you show and sell a listing agent's house, the listing agent's not going to ask for proof that you're an exclusive buyer's agent.
They're not enforcement. It's not their responsibility.
Exactly. And furthermore, the mortgage title company is not going to ask for the file. They're not going to ask to see if that was signed. So who's actually going to check it? Who's actually going to check the file? Okay, well, the agent or the brokerage representing the buyer's agent's going to check it. After when? When the file's turned in along with a commission check. So do you really think that most small brokerages are going to look for the exclusive, not finding it, and then sending the commission check back? I know big brokerages are going to have to do that because they're held to a different standard. But these smaller brokerages, they're probably not going to. And the MLSs have no real organized system in place right now to police the files themselves. The MLSs are the ones that are supposed to be policing the companies, the brokerages with less than $2 billion in volume. They're not going to, what's the mechanism? I haven't seen it. I've heard a
Nope.
lot of talk. I haven't actually seen
I
it.
search every day for examples and evidence of that, and I haven't seen any.
So
yet.
that's what's actually happening, in my opinion. Now you're going to say, well, there's no carve out in the contract. There was no actually written thing for a concession and from the buyer, essentially asking the seller to pay the buyer's agent commission as a concession in the contract, and it wasn't actually on the settlement statement. Okay, so what? I still think that this is my theory, folks. I still think the commissions are being paid out as they always have been, because the incentive structure is so that everyone still operates the same way, and buyer's agents still get paid, and buyer's brokerages, the brokers still get paid.
That shows that that's happening.
Right. I personally think that's what's happening. So until there actually is frankly, unfortunately, more litigation and more strong enforcement, I do not think there's going to be much of a change to the way that things happen. But there will be in big brokerages, because the big brokerages are held to a much higher standard. Over $2 billion, they had to sign settlement agreements and write enormous checks. And part of the settlement agreement, from what I was told, and I believe I verified it yesterday, the plaintiff's attorneys have the right to take a little look-see.
Once a quarter, right?
Once a quarter.
And fourth quarter is going to end, and all those closing statements are going to be on the books, and they absolutely will be audited.
They're going to look for the closing statements.
Yeah.
They're going to look for the contracts. They're going to look for the exclusives. They're going to see if it was done correctly. And if it wasn't, the plaintiff's attorneys are going to,
have a field day.
Have a field day.
They have said that they're specifically looking.
And that's what's going to happen. There's
Yeah.
okay. I don't even want to act.
Don't get you started.
I don't want to get me. Yeah, but and nobody's talking about it but Julie and I. The whole scenario I just gave you guys. Have you heard anybody else talking about it?
You will, because it will hit the fan.
Yeah, you will. I'll tell you, the great brokerages are, the great leaders of the great brokerages are, and I don't mind, Leo
Pereira.
Leo Pereira at eXp Realty. I know he's aware of all of this, and he's doing his best to protect eXp. He's doing his best to protect the agents.
Sure.
So there's leadership right there if you want an example of it at that level. So, I have talked to a lot of these other big brokers, a lot of the guys that are a party to the settlement. Actually, a couple yesterday that was just under it, and I asked what their mechanism is going to be in place, what it is to essentially police the files for these, essentially that the agents are following the guidelines. And you know what their answer was? They don't have one, and they asked me for suggestions.
Yeah.
Right? And then you're thinking, well, Tim, the MLSs are going to go after the agents where they find that the paperwork wasn't done correctly. How are the MLSs going to know the paperwork wasn't done correctly? They don't have a way to see the closed transactions.
You don't turn in your file to the MLS.
Right. So how are they going to know? They just going to start randomly auditing the brokerages' websites? What's the incentive structure in place for the MLSs to do that? I know what you're going to say, because they're worried about being sued themselves. Well, that's true, but exactly how are they going to be shown to be in violation of not policing it? So who's that going to leave to actually police the files? The brokers? That's not what the guidelines and that's not what the settlements say. You guys see how this is a big confusing thing? I just fire hosed you guys with a lot of information.
Blammo.
But you got to understand, that's the new reality in which we find ourselves. That's what really motivated Julie and I to basically create the ethical real estate professional exclusive buyer's agent designation, because it's going to clear the air for all the agents who want to skip all this noise and
Confusion.
just essentially become professional as fast as they can and show the market that they are professional, because the number one search term from consumers about real estate is, Julie Harris.
Do I have to pay a buyer agent commission?
Do this search yourself, guys. Julie used ChatGPT and asked it to search all the major search engines and asked it what the number one search term was that consumers are using when searching about residential real estate. And it was the consumers are, confused as hell about buyer agent commissions. And guess what the number two search term was, Julie Harris?
Who pays the buyer agent commission?
You guys getting the point here? So consumers are confused. The market's confused. The agents are confused. All this confusion is going to, result in a lot more confusion before it's settled. You need to urgently position yourself to jump above the fray, because that will give you a competitive advantage going into 2025. That is what ethical real estate professional is going to be all about. We are raising the bar for the real estate industry like never before. It's only going to be available to 2,500 agents. This is going to be one of the most prestigious. We're going to come out with probably over the next 18 to 24 months. We're coming out with more similar designations, but this is the only one for exclusive buyer agency. We're only making it available to 2,500 agents. If you want to get on the interest list, text the word buyer, BUYER, to 47372. This next point I love.
All right, the next three actually you're going to love. Number 8, FHA loan assumptions increased by 59% from 2021 to 2023, with over 5,000 of them completed so far in 2024. Let me do the next ones and then we'll talk about it.
Yep.
Okay, point number 9, VA loan assumptions increased 713% from 2021 to 2023, with, again, over 5,000 assumptions so far this year. Point number 10, experts predict that 20 to 25% of homes may be eligible for assumable mortgages, but the number of completed transactions still needs to be increased that didn't end up coming out right. That it will increase because we need more awareness of this new trend. Most people, this is new information to them. You should know if your listings that you currently have assumable mortgages, and ask the listing agent for your buyers before they write an offer if you're on the buyer side.
Well, you can search all of this and find out, Dan and Carrie again. Another deal they're working on for $1.3 million. And it's a VA house, and it's assumable. And the mortgages
because FHA, VA, and USAA are all assumable.
20% of all mortgages are assumable. And remember, I told you, this home's worth $1.3 million. So this isn't just some little cracker box house. This is a really nice house. And so it's worth $1.3 million. It's a VA mortgage. It has an assumable mortgage. The interest rate is, Carrie told me she thought was less than 3%, with probably like 25 years left on the mortgage. What a sweet mortgage for someone to assume. Do you think that makes that house 1,000 times more sellable and more marketable? Remember, we're in a buyer's market, in that market as well, where there's more homes than there are buyers right now. But all of a sudden, this one offers the opportunity for you to walk into a 2.7 or 85% mortgage. Don't you think that immediately is going to make that the top of the list for every buyer?
Yeah, well, here's the thing, that whenever you talk about the ones that are on the more expensive end of the spectrum, it makes even more sense for that, because if you were to look at the 4 or 5 years of mortgage they're not paying and calculate the savings,
it's all interest.
It's incredible. I mean, I don't know how much that adds up to. It could be like over $100,000 worth of payments.
Julie, it's all interest. I mean, your mortgage,
it's all interest.
A 30-year fix, you're almost paying almost all interest for like the first 18 years.
Yeah, and think of the difference. We did when we did the assumable podcast last Friday, we took an example and showed the savings just in the payment, the difference between, like in Carrie's case, coming in under 3% versus paying 6.88. That's a huge difference. So to me, not knowing about assumables in today's market conditions is malpractice.
Well, for sure. So refer back to the podcast we did last Friday.
There you go. Okay.
And refer to the notes that we did for the podcast last Friday, where we included links to websites and things like that where you can search out. And here's an advanced player points.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You can tell our daughter's a gamer. So here it is. Ready? Go and search your expired listings in your marketplace going back 12 months and scrub it against a list of assumable mortgages. Scrub it against the mortgage type. And if it's a FHA, VA, I guarantee you it's assumable. So that means that that's an expired listing where the seller doesn't realize their mortgage is assumable. And even if the house was overpriced, 6 months ago, home's probably appreciated by at least 1 or 2%, and it's assumable, that is killer information to bring to that seller. Don't you think that gives you an unfair advantage in the marketplace when competing with other listing agents for that listing?
Well, even if you're looking at some really nice expireds that you're considering calling, which all of you should be doing, and you can't tell whether it's, because you can't always tell in the MLS or sometimes the lookups, maybe it is conventional. Don't you think that's a fantastic excuse to be talking to that expired, to even ask them to take a look at their loan docs and make sure? Because if you haven't been marketing it and you are assumable, maybe that's something that would sell your house tomorrow. It's a great excuse to start a conversation, which is what this podcast is about. Okay, so these are your talking points for this weekend. The more you talk about real estate, the more transactions you'll do. Pop buys, open houses, proactive lead generation, furiously fast lead follow-up. These are all places where you can deploy your knowledge. Most of all, be sure to ask, of course, who do you know who could use your help buying or selling real estate, or investing in real estate, flipping, buying rentals, leasing, whatever the case may be. Let's see, who was it this morning? One of my coaching calls this morning, she was doing some pop buys, reconnecting with her past clients or center of influence. And the very next day, she got a referral because she was out there talking about real estate, right? I think maybe she hit 10 doors.
You're making a point. This is the best time to be having direct contact with folks because, it's the end of the year. A lot of people take time off at the end of the year, the holidays, all the things, right? But the other thing is most of your competitors are not going to be in real estate. They're not going to be in real estate mind. They're not certainly going to be proactively lead generating and having meaningful conversations. Build massive momentum going into next year. If you want to know how to lock in your best year ever in real estate, just mentally and emotionally assume that it's already started, really effectively already started October 1st. Well, you still basically got 2 months and a lot of opportunities for social interaction. come on, guys, be the best version of yourself being a real estate practitioner. Just see yourself in in conversation with people where you're bringing the type of value where we gave you a whole bunch of conversation starters on today's podcast. Download the notes, harrisrealestatedaily.com, and go out there with energy and enthusiasm, knowing confidently that you have information that, frankly, all these consumers might, possibly want urgently, and you can then articulate your value by telling them exactly what's going on in the market. This is what makes you different ultimately. Look, everyone's got a bunch of followers on Instagram. Everyone's got a bunch of Mickey Mouse on TikTok and all the other things. But how many people, when you talk to them, actually exude the sense of confidence that only comes from being an actual expert in a particular area, in the case of what you're doing, your local markets and real estate?
That's right. The work you do fourth quarter ensures your success or failure next year.
Or if you don't do any, the opposite's true as well. So guys, thank you for keeping this number one listened to daily podcast for real estate professionals. Your homework today is obviously subscribe to the newsletter if you haven't done so already. Urgently get your name on the wait list or the interest list for the Ethical Real Estate Professional exclusive buyer agent designation. You can check out that website, ethicalrealestateprofessional.com. It's by simply texting the word buyer, B-U-Y-E-R, to 47372. Have a fantastic day. We'll talk with you on the show tomorrow.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.